Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Pryor, and I'm sitting before you reviewing Jeff Rice's book, The Rhetoric of Cool, Composition Studies and New Media. I don't know about you, but when I think of cool, a few images come to my mind. I think of James Dean, I think of Marlon Brando, I think of Leonard Cohen. I'm sure we all have our own ideas of what cool is, and so does Jeff Rice. And he doesn't really think of cool as being that kind of a rebel, that kind of an outsider. He sees cool in a different way as it pertains to composition studies. Throughout the book, he uses the date 1963. 1963 is a huge date for him because not only is that the year that John F. Kennedy was assassinated, or Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his speech, I Have a Dream, on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 1963 was the year that the Four Cs met. And the Four Cs, the theme of 1963's the Conference on College Composition and Communication, it was the content of the English course and what's going on inside of these English courses. And they came up with a new approach, or an old new approach, in terms of how they thought English composition should be conducted within the classroom. No longer were these conferences going to be about reporting about students' work habits, but they were encouraging in this conference for instructors to be more theoretical about how they wrote about writing, and they pushed for new theoretical principles and interest in empirical studies of writing habits and practices. And what they do is that from these theoretical explorations, compositional studies latched onto classic rhetoric. Cicero, Aristotle became the outline for compositional studies. However, according to Jeff Rice, they built the wrong outline. According to Rice, he says, in fact, we shouldn't have built an outline at all because the outline has kept us too structured and focused on an outdated, even for its time, status quo. And what he says is that the Four Cs missed the boat. They didn't see what was going on at the moment. He points out there's incredible things going on in terms of the technological, the visual, and the cultural influences all around them, and they didn't see it. And he wants to kind of push for these elements within the composition classroom. Jeff Rice does. And what he points out is that during the same year that the Four Cs were meeting and coming up with their notion of bringing rhetoric into the composition class, he says that they should have paid more attention to three important writers that were emerging from 1963, and they all used this term cool in order to define their observations regarding communication practices. These three writers, number one was Marshall McLuhan. He employs the word cool to describe the high participatory nature of certain media forms, i.e. The telephone, speech, cartoons, television, and speech. And what he calls hot media, as opposed to, which is low participatory media, such as radio, print, photographs, movies, and lectures. At the same time, there's another scholar, another writer, Amiri Baraka, who used cool to define and describe the African American reaction to a white oppressive authority, and how they react to that white oppressive authority is with a cool, calm, non-involved, detached kind of manner. And this is something Rice finds interesting in terms of the cultural. And meanwhile, we also have the scholar named Robert Farris Thompson, who was working in West Africa and later recorded his observations in his Flash of the Spirit, which discovered that the African American terms like cool have their roots in indigenous African societies, such as the Yoruba, who use cool as a form of visual writing in order to express art and aesthetics in terms of lifestyle characteristics, which includes appeasement, conciliation, and calmness. Together, these writers discover cool as something beyond its immediate and established connotations of popularity or personality. These writers explore the same word in areas that have become the most important to composition studies today, according to Jeff Rice, that being technology, cultural studies, and visual writing. All must be implemented at the same time in terms of his new rhetoric of cool. So these three writers definitely influenced the electronic writing practice, which he calls, again, the rhetoric of cool. So what is cool? Well, Rice uses a lot of terminology to try to explain his concept of cool. He brings in this notion that, well, the four C's introduced rhetoric, Aristotelian rhetoric for the most part. And he says, well, this reliance on topoi, which he says not a good idea. He doesn't agree with this use of topoi. He says that it goes against, he actually brings in a term by Plato called chora. Chora is C-H-O-R-A. This is something that he thinks should be used instead of topoi. Topoi I think of in terms of the rhetorical modes. He says that Aristotle's topoi is too fixed and rigid, which is a problem when working in the digital. Chora, which is the principle that the rhetorical meaning is not stable, but instead it's fluid and it's moving. So chora is a really good way to try to explain what he means by cool. It's an argumentative strategy in which different meanings are associated and placed in tension in order to produce discourse. Rather than choosing one meaning, the practitioner of chora uses all of them. Rice prefers that, discussing and describing various meanings of cool that you can draw from different sources as diverse as a McLuhan, as a Burroughs, as a Jack Kerouac, as certain text on jazz. You can use hip-hop, you can use anthropology, you meet music. All of these are perfectly acceptable, and what you do with this is cool, therefore, is defined through association across several meanings, and sometimes conflicting meanings. That's perfectly okay. He also talks about appropriation, juxtaposition as important to the rhetoric of cool. Appropriation about moving outside of just the English studies, and you use this term called parataxis. And parataxis is a rhetorical premise where items can be arranged and positioned in a variety of ways, much like a collage, and each time they generate meanings, even if the meaning isn't clear. It's a lot like that chapter that we read called Petals on a Wet Black Bough, except we take samples from literacy and music, video to generate new meanings, especially in the digital classroom. He uses the analogy of student as DJ, who mixing different samples into song to create a different experience. He also talks about non-linearity, or getting rid of the modes, and instead of using fixed and rigid topoi, like definition, cause and effect, classification, he encourages non-linearity, uses of all kinds of different threads to create the meaning and create a meaningful writing tapestry. Cool is about creating the new media-oriented writer. It's a way of looking and trying to look at the traditional way writing is taught and reevaluate it in new ways. I found it very interesting. I found it also, I see how challenging it could be for a composition instructor, because he's asking us to stretch outside of our fields, moving in advertising, marketing, creative writing, music, cultural studies, history, which are all fields of study onto their own. And I think that a lot of people will be uncomfortable trying to become experts in these different fields. But in the end, I think that this might work for a lot of people. I have to be fair to Jeff Rice. I didn't know that he also had a textbook that deals with the actual practice of his rhetoric of cool. And we're supposed to use that in tandem with this book. It would be really interesting to get more of a practical sense of what he was trying to deliver. Okay, I'm almost out of time. I thank you very much for your patience, and I apologize for any of the screw-ups getting this late. I tried it last night and it just didn't work, so hope this is new and improved. See you.